This episode on 3 dimensions is the 10th video in the series that goes along with James R. Parker's book, Generative Art, Algorithms as Artistic Tool.
A computer screen is flat, basically, two-dimensional, let's say. The world is three-dimensional. And so one of the things we should really talk about is how to enter that third dimension, even though all we can see is this flat screen. And of course, artists do this all the time. When an artist is making a painting, they paint things in perspective and they take into account distance and size and all sorts of things of that sort. In processing, we can do the same thing. So processing allows us to create three-dimensional objects, simulated three-dimensional objects, let's say a cube, and then to look at that cube from a particular place in three-dimensional space. And that's really what we're doing with painting and photography. We have a flat plane in between us and the scene on which this object of the scene is projected. And that's really what we're rendering. And in three-dimensional work on processing, we do the same thing. We define a number of three-dimensional objects, we place them in locations wherever we like, and then we render the scene from a particular spot. What that means is that we can change our perspective, we can change the place from which we view things, and everything else in the world will also change correspondingly in a way that seems natural to a human being who's used to three dimensions. So this is how, by the way, video games are created. When you have a first-person video game, all of the world in three dimensions is seen from the point of view of where your character is in that three-dimensional scene. So it's really quite important to understand three dimensions and how to manipulate them. And there are a couple of examples in the chapter of why we can use three dimensions and why people expect to see things work in a certain way.
To make a computer-drawn object appear real, we generally need to impose a texture on its surface. Here are 2 cubes, one that is simply colored brown and one that has a texture that lends an appearance of reality. In the book, we see how brick image texture, for example, is mapped onto a cube. And here is the result of that mapping.
One of the critical things in three-dimensional scene development is lighting. We've never had to worry about that before because all computer graphics in 2 dimensions just sort of assume you have a white piece of paper and you're drawing on it. But if you are in a three-dimensional world that you're creating, where the light comes from and how much light there is and what color it is, all matters. And so when we're talking about three-dimensional art, we're also talking about designing the light, designing where the camera is and designing what all of the objects are. And we can really do that very easily in processing. And we really are going to talk about simple ways to do these things.
In the next part, Jim Parker talks about his own work. The book, Generative Art, Algorithms as Artistic Tool, is published by Dervile and Uproot Books.